If you've been sent a contract, you can agree that contract either in writing by signing it, but also by action. So if you step foot on site, by action, you have been deemed to have agreed to that contract. Some people are in the industry because they don't feel that they're academic, and there's that whole fear factor, and sometimes it goes back to self-worth. If you don't feel like you've got the strength, the education, the confidence to battle someone, get someone around the table like me, I've got no problem in standing there and running rings around them. It's my favourite thing to do. It takes a lot of energy, but I love it. Not something you want to be experiencing on the wrong side of that table. Let me tell you that for nothing.
Welcome to Taking the Con Out of Construction, the straight-talking show that's changing the industry, one episode at a time. Small mistakes can cost big money, and even more in time. But a small investment in listening to this episode could help you avoid disputes, delays, and costly pitfalls, while giving you the know-how to stop problems before they start. Let's turn complexity into clarity and take the con out of construction.
Welcome back to Taking the Con Out of Construction. This week, Michelle and I will be delving into contracts, what they're for, why they matter, and how to avoid the mistakes that can turn a dream project into a nightmare. Michelle, thank you for taking the time to address this. I'm sure for some it can be a very daunting subject.
Certainly can. It's normal and human to be a little bit fearful of something you don't understand. And I understand with contracts and anything legal, it can be really intimidating. I talk about contracts a lot. Probably the thing I mention the most, and I would say I probably mention at least once a day, even on the weekends. So I do a lot of talks around contracts and have done for a while. And the reason is I want to change the way people look at them in, not just in my industry. People should understand contracts moving forward in general. So one of the things that I always use, because I like to be different, in case you didn't notice that already, and make things a bit more fun. Contracts are the most boring thing ever, I used to think. And I hated them. I remember me telling you the days when I used to have to, oh my God, I hated them. I hated them. And as a junior, that's what we had to do. And it was all, hated it. Then I had a problem on a site and I didn't do the contract they should have done, or somebody else done and not done a contract how they should have done. And then all of a sudden this shit hits the fan and it's a major problem. So I started to pay a bit more attention to contracts, and then a bit more, and then a bit more. And then all of a sudden, and also contracts have changed over the last at least 5 years, probably 10, where solicitors are writing them a lot more. Contracts used to always be written by QSs, always. And then now a lot of, I mean, sure, that for the massive, probably multi-million pound contracts, the solicitors started to get involved with them. But it used to be PQSs before that. So when a solicitor gets involved with a contract compared to a QS, it's very different, because the solicitor's brief or ethos around a contract is to protect their client no matter what. Whereas a QS's idea around a contract is they have a commercial awareness. So obviously it's about saving money. How I get people to sort of think about contracts, because a lot of people are scared of them, is to talk about marriage. I like throwing people off and sort of getting them think slightly differently. So I often ask in a room, depending on how many are, how many people here are married? Few people come up. Okay. How many people are divorced? Some people put their hands up, some people don't. How many people here had a prenup? No one ever puts their hand up to that. How many people, the ones that have been divorced, now they're divorced, wish they had a prenup? And then people laugh. Now, I don't have a prenup, but sometimes I think maybe I should have done, because a prenup is a contract. And when we're talking about construction contracts, or any contract in general, a contract should be a list of expectations. So it's a document that the two parties are going into an agreement, and it's a list of expectations, theoretically. This is what we're going to do. So it's actually writing and documenting what the plan is. So what the intentions are, who's going to do what, I'm going to do this, you're going to do that, etc., etc. Now, when everyone's excited about the project, so the reason I use marriage is when you're in love and you're going to have 2.4 children and a dog, and you're going to live here and you have a picket fence and blah, 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 and everyone's in love and everything's great. If at that point you had a conversation to say, if things don't work out, because I don't know what the statistics are for marriages working, but if things don't work out, this is what we're going to do. You're going to get the dog, I'm going to get the house, you're going to get the kids, whatever. And to be fair, you could update that. Like, people could have, as you do your wills, you could update your prenup on a yearly basis when things change. Like, you could update it with your will. And I know in my own marriage, let's put it this way, life has tested me and I've had to go through a lot of life, right? And what happens when you go through life is you get nervous, experiences, trauma, whatever. I know there are situations that I panic in my marriage. And I panic because I don't have a safety blanket necessarily. And because I'm the breadwinner, we don't have the most normal, average relationship marriage. I'm the breadwinner. I'm not the man of the marriage, because that's not how I feel. But I do a lot of, let's say, the male role in a traditional marriage. And it works for us most of the time. But being a business owner, entrepreneur, woman in construction, whatever, hormonal, perimenopausal, the whole shebang, there are days that I feel pressured and I feel panicked, or I feel overwhelmed, or I feel undervalued. And sometimes I think, shit, what am I going to fucking do? And sometimes that shit, what the fuck am I going to do, makes it worse. If I had a prenup, I'd be like, well, we've already agreed that I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And when emotions start getting involved, like, people get antsy. So if I had a prenup that said, if we were to get married, I put this into the house, he put that into the house, I did this, I did that, I've done this with the business, I've done that. If we decide to go our separate ways, I'm responsible for this, he's responsible for that, he's going to pay this, I'm going to pay that, whatever. When I'm feeling vulnerable and tired and overworked, underwhelmed, because it happens, and I'm not saying it's anything to do with necessarily my husband doing anything, he probably hasn't, sometimes it's just me. When I am sitting up at night and I can't sleep and all these things are going around in my head, I could go to sleep because I know full well that if I ever wanted to leave, I could, and this is what I'd be left with, rather than having that panic and that anxiety that sets in and sends you to lally. If I had a prenup. So my parents got divorced. I understand what it went through. I've got family members that have got divorced. I've gone through a breakup with my daughter's father. I wasn't a divorce. We didn't actually get married. Lucky escape. But ultimately, I know what it's like to separate with someone and have a child with someone, how that works. And obviously, I've been through a child of divorced parents. So I understand how nasty it can get. And I've seen lots of things. Everyone knows how nasty a divorce can get. But actually, if you had that agreement when everyone was friends and you loved each other, and the whole idea of a divorce was way beyond there, whatever you could ever think of, and you had all that in agreement, I genuinely believe, from my experience with contracts, there would be a lot less divorce. Because sometimes I think people panic and they're just like, do you know what? I'm getting out now because I don't want to carry on working and you take everything, or I don't want to carry on working and you lose everything because I don't feel safe and I don't feel protected and I'm not safe in this marriage. That is what contracts are for. Because ultimately, once you're pissed off, you're upset, you're hurt, or emotions involved and they've turned, you'll go for the jugular. I mean, if you look at a couple and how they treat each other before they get married, and then you look at them in divorce, and it's unrecognizable.
Yeah.
And it's just realistic. But if you actually wrote your expectations of the marriage down, I mean, some people write their own vows. I'll be honest, I don't even remember mine. I should probably look them up, and sometimes I'm surprised I haven't pinned them on a wall and thrown them in my husband's face. That would be much more me. But if you had a list of expectations and this is what you were expecting, and I say, okay, if we're going to have children, this, but what happens if we can't have children? Or what happens if we do have children and I don't have to go to work, or I am going to work? What is going to happen when you're earning all this money? But all these different things, or like, wrote what you was expecting, that I really do believe there'd be a lot less divorce. And I didn't do it myself, contract specialist, didn't do it myself. And sometimes I wish I had, but that's different. And contracts, regardless of what the circumstances, are exactly the same. I will review people's contracts and different things. Now, most of my experiences with JCT, which is a joint contract tribunal, there are different ones within a contract. So with the JCT suite, they've just renewed it, but you've got a number of different variations throughout the time. So theoretically, I'm not going to list all of them because it's quite a few, but you've got a homeowner's contract. So that's obviously if you own the home, you're going to live in it. That's a homeowner's contract. Because obviously without, as we discussed before, if you intending to live in the property you're talking about, you're exempt from the construction note. So there is a contract to allow you to be protected.
Yeah.
Then you have minor works, which is small contracts. Then you've got standard JCT, intermediate JCT. You've got design and build. Design and build is where you give a list of requirements and then the contractor either takes on your design team by novation, so it means they then start working for you, or they use their own design team and they develop it. So you have a list of requirements and then the contractor, providing they hit those requirements, they deliver. Now, a lot of people get really confused about what a D&B contract really is. And then a lot of people use a D&B contract in the wrong way. And a D&B contract is basically, depending on how the contract is written, obviously, because this is very, very generic. And I'm telling you what the standard unamended versions mean and do. But obviously, if you've got amendments to a contract, it could potentially take everything I'm telling you out and put something totally different in. So you have to make sure you read your contract for this reason. I have contracts that I review all the time, and there's 70, 80, 90. One of them had 170 pages of amendments, and it was, yeah, painful. A D&B contract is basically when you know what you want, but you don't really care how it's delivered. As long as it's, for example, got pink walls, you don't care if it's Farrow or Dulux, as long as it's pink. You don't care what the structure is. You set what your requirements are. A lot of people enter into D&B contracts and actually don't realise that the contractor could do whatever they want and deliver it any way they like, as long as they hit the criteria of the employer's requirements, and where they actually should want more control, whereas what they should do is have a different form of contract. So you also have intermediate contracts, but you'll have certain design responsibilities for the subcontractors most of the time, and it's called contractor's design portion. Most of the time it will be M&E, so mechanical and electrical, because they need to be designed with the building and whatever's suitable and also the most cost-effective way. And often with employers' requirements, sometimes they get it totally wrong and it's not the most efficient way of doing things. It doesn't really work. So that's always a risk thing. Get it into them, get them to design it. Other things like now, especially cladding, curtain walling, there's lots of things that you can have contractor design. And understanding what is important and people get wrong is having the right contract in the first place. It should be the right contract for your project. And every project should be different unless they're carbon copies, which is rare. So yeah, it's understanding what the type of contract it is and also paying attention. So you might have worked on a JCT contract with no amendments. You may have a JCT D&B contract with no amendments. You need to understand the difference between those two contracts. And you need to understand the difference of contractor design portion and design and build. They are different. The rules are different. The regulations are different. I'm not going to go into too much detail, partially one, because in all honesty, I can't always remember the differences myself unless I've got one in front of me.
Yeah.
And I don't review contracts as much as I used to. But also the new suite of contracts that come out recently, I'm not as familiar with them because actually none of them are in play yet. Because most of the projects I worked on have been in contract or have been at least the tender process on the 2016 versions. And actually you won't really start having the most recent contracts because they're not coming through yet, because obviously there's a big procurement process beforehand. So going back to the whole marriage thing, when everybody's friends and you're excited about the opportunities and the project and what's going to be happening, and you're picking colours and whatever, and it's all grey, construction will drain you. It is draining. It's exhausting. It takes time. It flies, then it stops, and it flies, then it stops. And then the end bit is just the most painful because you're just so nearly there, but there's just so many little bits and the little bits just take forever. It's the most painful part of the project, but it's also the most volatile. But ultimately, when you're getting to the end of a project, you're tired. You just want it done. You're sick of picking wallpapers. You're sick of picking finishes. You're sick of looking at this. You're sick of looking at all the people around the room. You're sick of being telling on site. You're sick of it. You just want to move on to the next pretty shiny thing. And that's when things get uncomfortable. But also, it's a long old time since you shook hands at the beginning and everyone was friends and we were all excited about the project. Regardless, even if it was a few weeks, like could be years, could be a few months, anything in between. If you've always got something the whole way through, because we've recorded a number of podcasts, can I remember what I've said in all of them? No. So why people expect to totally understand and agree what they discussed could be 2-3 years ago, let alone weeks or whatever, it's just unreadable. So the point of a decent contract is making sure that everybody understands. So at any point that you have a wobble and you're concerned about it, like I was saying about me and my marriage, whenever you have a wobble and you're a bit concerned or something isn't quite going to plan, you think, am I going to get screwed or things aren't going wrong? Go back and have a look and see it. And you'll have one of two reactions. You'll either think, oh shit, that's not what we agreed. I'm wrong. Give yourself a little wobble on the head and go back to sleep or calm yourself down. Or you'll go, yeah, I was right. We did agree that. And then you'll say, hey, I was expecting this. Remember we discussed it? We put it in the contract. Oh, yeah. And it's where your expectations have changed. Like, you and I could go out for dinner, and 3 months later, we could have a conversation about the dinner, and you'd have a different interpretation of the dinner as I did. That's just human nature.
Yeah.
So when you've got things in a contract and everything is understood, and then I's are dotted and T's are crossed, and it's done properly, it's always there as a reminder of what you agreed. And it's accountability. And you have that power and that backup and that safety net, or whatever you want to call it, to say, hey, this is not what we agreed, or this has happened and this is how we agreed we were going to deal with it. And when you have that backup and that security, just the way that you think about the project, how you act, is so different. It's unbelievable. And I know this for fact because not a single contract that I have written has ended up in dispute. Not one. And also, one other thing is really, really, really important is get the contract right. Now, there are ways of doing things. You can have a letter of intent and things like that, so you can actually enter into an agreement and get the project right. This is a whole different topic, with the amount of people that rush, get it done, get it started. If you just spend a little bit longer at the front end of the project before you touch anything, it's going to save you an absolute fortune and get things done properly. One, because as soon as you start on site, you've got prelims. So you've got staff, you've got facilities, you've got toilets, for God's sake. They do not need to be on site until you've started. And also, if you start too quickly, people can either go ahead and they get mistakes and you have to do things. And it honestly, every single time, you are so much better off spending a couple more weeks or days or months or whatever it may be at the front end. You will save yourself tenfold that time at the back end. But there are restrictions. For example, planning decisions, you have to start within X amount of time. So you can start it, but then rather than getting the contract half-hearted, you do a letter of intent or whatever it may be to say, we are going to enter into a contract and these are the things that we need to agree or discuss or cost or program prior to doing it. But you just need to make sure that, one, the contract covers everything you need to be, works for both parties and both parties are happy with it, because they're not there to screw someone. They should not be biased or one-sided. But also that they cover enough detail and that everybody's comfortable, that they know exactly what they're supposed to do and your expectations are aligned. That is the purpose of a contract. Not everybody writes a contract like that. But that's what I do. Now, when clients come to me, and I've probably mentioned this before, I will agree a contract that doesn't just benefit my client, it also benefits the other parties. And some people raise an eyebrow at this on both sides. Sometimes my client raised an eyebrow and sometimes the other party raises an eyebrow thinking, what's she up to? Because ultimately, for my client, it's in their best interest for the contract to be good for their client or the other party, because that's how you feel comfortable and you get the most successful projects. Now, many, many times, and I think I've mentioned this before, I've got I've been in situations where people are halfway through and nearly at the end of the project and there is no contract, or it's not been signed, or there's been a purchase order that writes off the contract. And then I look at it and then and they're like, oh, well, if you wanted to review the contract, you should have done that at tender stage. It says in the contract that you have to review the contract at tender stage. You haven't read your contract. And I actually wrote once, and I laugh about it with one of my clients all the time. This went backwards and forwards, and I was saying, this isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right with your contract. And this guy was just arguing with me, just constantly, just batting back. And in the end, in capital letters, I went, you need to read your contract. Then come back to me, because I'm not explaining to you why your contract is fucked up and it's wrong. And I went, as an example, this term is not in here. Anyway, when we had the meeting, and they had the whole team of solicitors and whatever, whole normal intimidating rubbish. We sat there, and actually the guy turned around to the solicitor and went, yes, this clause, I've looked at this contract, because I did tell him to, and he's obviously read the contract, realised what a pile of crap it was, and then changed his stance. And he was like, I can't find this clause anywhere, and I've read it now. And he was really annoyed with his solicitor because he couldn't find the term. And then all of a sudden he came on board, and what they'd done is they basically copied and pasted a random things from other contracts, but actually they didn't fit. And it happens all the time, like rinse and repeat, but you can't rinse and repeat an entire contract unless the term is exactly the same and the work is exactly the same. You can get a more generalized contract, but you have to read it and make sure that it's not talking about something specific to that job, because even if you had two houses next to each other and you were doing exactly the same thing, there is a potential, even on two houses next to each other, the ground conditions might be different. I've never ever known two projects to be exactly the same. Things are going to change, things are going to happen, and it's just about having an agreement in advance of how you're going to deal with them. And it does, mentally, it makes a difference.
What are the most common mistakes that people make when they enter into a contract?
So one of the most regular things is, one, people think that because they haven't signed a contract, they're not in contract. Now, by law, if you've been sent a contract, you can agree that contract either in writing by signing it, but also by action. So if you sent a price and then they've agreed the price and then the contract is on the price and then you step foot on site, by action, you have been deemed to have agreed to that contract. As I've mentioned before, it can be difficult to rely on a contract depending on the terms of that contract. There is a contract and some of the terms will be agreed, but program, for example, is difficult if you don't know when they start on the site and that kind of thing. It depends on, obviously, the strength of your solicitor in your case. But that is an issue. So some people don't realise that just by turning up on site or getting paid or accepting payment or whatever it may be, you are deemed to agree to the terms of that contract. Now that causes a lot of people problems. The amendments is a big issue. One of my clients is ground worker. They do sort of the bases for big projects and they turn basically animal excrement into energy. I don't really understand it. I review the contract for them and my team does all the procurement. And by procurement, I mean purchasing, projects, subcontractors, materials, all that kind of stuff. So when he has a new client, and a lot of his clients are repeat because he's incredible, he always gets me to review the contract. And so we have a look at it and go through it. And what I do with him is I ask him for a Word version and I'll put comments on it and I will highlight what the problem is I don't like. And I will explain what my issue is and what I want it to know and why. Because just going no isn't effective. And when you're looking to take a whole heap of amendments out of a contract written by solicitors, there's a gameplay to some extent. And I remember going to one of these courts and it was this big fancy solicitors. We looked at the building because the location of the meeting had been changed last minute. And I said to him, I think they're trying to intimidate us with this fancy office. He was like, probably, but they haven't met us yet. And so we went in, it was just me and him and there was like 17 other people around this table. Anyway, I sort of explained to them that one of the common things that solicitors are writing in contracts is new engineering contract. So an NEC contract is primarily for groundworks and things like that. So this particular client uses them all the time in different amendments. They are much simpler. And I remember the first time he phoned me up a few years ago, we used to work for the same company and they said, oh, what do you know about NEC contracts? And I said, well, I haven't looked at one for a while, but contract's contract. I reviewed it and now I look at all of them. So it didn't take me long to refresh myself, but most contracts will have like a design approval system. And generally they are something along the lines of you have to send in your proposal to like the project manager, whatever, that's stipulated in the contract. And then normally it will say, if after 7, 14, 24, 28 days, whatever it may be, which is amendable, you haven't heard back from the project manager or whoever is responsible for signing off the design is deemed to be approved. Now, when a solicitor takes that out and replaces it with no design is approved unless it's received in writing by XYZ, what happens is, and as much as I exaggerate it, it is true, the project will stop. And the client will have a project manager that won't read the contract. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Majority of the time, nobody reads the contract except me, the solicitors, potentially the client. But a lot of the time, the clients don't even read their own contracts because that's what they pay solicitors for. And a lot of the time, my employers won't read the contract because that's what they pay me for. But ultimately, there will be 1 or 2 parties reading these contracts and no one else looks at them. The subcontractors, decent subcontractors and whatever down the line will look at them. But again, it's not always the individual. They might be paying someone to do it. It's unlikely, but I've never met anybody else that reads a contract. So the site manager or project manager or the architect is going to send their information to the client's project manager, whoever's notifying the contract. And unless they've got any savvy or if I've reviewed their contract, they will not act on that and they will do nothing until they've got the response. They might do. And if they do, and the client's aware of that, they might not get paid for it. So contractors and subcontractors need to be fully aware of that process because they could follow the standard process and not get paid for whatever it is if they want to be stickler. But when I say to the solicitors, your clients' personnel on the ground are probably not going to read this contract. And unless you advise them of the process, they're going to see something come through. They'll look at it and think, oh, rather than spend the time filling out a form to approve it, stamp it, whatever they want to do, whatever the approval process is, they'll just look and go, yeah, it's fine. They tend to only come back to anything if there's a problem. So by standard and the normal way of doing things, they're going to look at that and they're just going to, if it's not an issue, they're just going to leave it. Now, from where their client is exposed is the fact that if the contractor's aware of that, they can sit there on site, and wait and do nothing. Okay, I wouldn't recommend this because ultimately there's probably some judicial precedent that might go against this, but I'm just talking in theory. If that contractor sits on site for 6 months, 10 months, that client is then liable for an EOT, an extension of time. And the most expensive thing on a project, majority of the time, is the labour on site and the prelims. And they've automatically exposed their client to prelims on any single change that's done because that's just the way they works. And all of a sudden, when they understand that, it's amazing how quickly that is changed. Now, don't get me wrong, some they don't. So that's what I do with them, with the solicitors. And I say, look, I want to change this amendment and this is why. On the other hand, I would also do a list of recommendations for my client that's separate. And I go, look, these are ones I'm not happy with. I raise them as a red flag, but ultimately, a lot of the time they'll go, I'm fine with that because that's in my control. And I'm going to make it aware, like, okay, this could catch you up. You have to do this, or you're exposing yourself if you don't deliver, you need to do this. And they're like, it's fine. I know I'm going to deliver. They will take that risk. And ultimately, it's up to them. I will be scrupulous and say, I don't like this, don't like this, don't like that. These are definite no's. Do not agree to this in any circumstances. These are deal breakers. And then it's up to my client to decide what they want to do and what risks they're willing to take. I'm not there to make those decisions for them. I'm there to reduce their risk. Similar to a solicitor, but obviously I'm just a bit more aware of how things work. But it's about the way you deliver that message, which I've said before in the negotiations. It's like, rather than just going, no, like children, come on, let's do this. No. You could roll your eyes. If you then try and find out why the child doesn't want to do something and it's because they don't want to put their shoes on, it's because actually their shoes are now too small. You could kick off on them and make them put their shoes on and they're just going to say no. But ultimately the reason is because the shoes are too small and they hurt. Unless you ask a question, you're not going to find that information out. So again, as I said before, communication is key, but also it's making sure that you understand what you're doing and how you deliver that message. And when I've had people get a bit frosty, oh, what are we getting contractual for? You're getting contractual because a company's about to go bust because you're only 200 grand. For a company that's a multi-millionaire company, that's not an issue. For a company that's only got a £3 million turnover, 200 grand is a lot of money. Or you haven't done this or you haven't done that. And sometimes I have to go, well, actually, legally, we can adjudicate and we can go, this and this because you've done that wrong. Last chance saloon. You're going to get around the table and take this seriously and stop being so blasé about it and let's have a conversation and come to an agreement, or am I going to see you in court? And that's kind of what happens. But ultimately, it doesn't make any sense how people wouldn't review a contract or pay someone a 400 quid or whatever it may be to review their contracts. And someone goes back saying, yeah, or they make amendments. So if I'm reviewing a contract, I'll review it. And I don't expect any of my clients to understand what's the point in employing me if they're going to then learn how to do it. I will give them the key points, but I will make sure that they understand what they need to do. And I'll give them the opportunity. A lot of the time, they'll ask me to do the contract administration. I'll be heavily involved in the project anyway, so it doesn't necessarily matter. Or I'll go do workshops or I'll train them. I make sure they understand it because what's the point in them spending money on me agreeing if they don't understand it? And that's the other thing is they don't always pay attention and understand it or they don't want to. And there's a big fear around contracts. But actually what's really powerful is getting a contract that works for you. There is a psychological stance on it because, as I've mentioned before, about how there is a industry-wide habit that people just jump through hoops for clients because the client says this and client says that and because you want to get work. And it's just the way that the industry is. A lot of people are fearful of negotiating a contract or saying, I don't like this amount of contract. Now, I can't talk for all QSs because I'm not your average QS. I get that. But when you're dealing with a decent QS or a PQS firm or something like that, when you actually negotiate a contract, I mean, when I send a tender out and somebody queries a contract, I'm like, okay, good. This is good. They've read it. Because there is nothing worse than battling out with someone throughout a 12 or 18 month period for someone that hasn't read the goddamn contract and doesn't understand what they need to do. Because then I've got to be an arsehole all the time, reminding them of the contract and getting contractual saying, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to do, this is what you're supposed to do. Because I have a responsibility to the funders, to the people that work for the owners, whatever. I have a whole heap of people that I need to keep happy, and I have to abide by that contract. That's my job. So when they haven't bothered looking at it, I'm like, ugh. But when a company's come back and said, we're asking about this, and sometimes there are contracts that are written by a solicitor, I will then look at them, or a client or somebody wants certain terms in there. I will say to them, they're not going to read this term. We put it out there, we try, and then have to go to various solicitors and say, they've said no to this particular one, and eventually they take it out of the contract. However, we go through this process. So I know straight away that when I've done a contract properly and they understand it and they're asking me queries, that they've looked at it and they've understood it and we've got a good way forward. So that's the sort of idea around it. So when you are given a contract, don't feel intimidated to not go back and ask queries, because that's actually a good sign, because it shows your level of professionalism and that you've actually looked at it. A contract is a tool. And once you understand how to use it, the same as you have any other tool, once you understand how to use it and what it means and how you can use it to your advantage, they really aren't scary. And I think it's difficult when you don't understand contracts. And especially, as I've said before, some people in the construction industry are in the industry because they don't feel that they're academic, and there's that whole fear factor. And sometimes it goes back to self-worth and all heap of things that we don't need to go into. But generally, when it comes to a contract, it should be right for both parties. Otherwise, it's a waste of time. And you telling around what you need out of the agreement and out of the contract, there's nothing wrong with doing it, saying, actually, I need to do this, or I want to do it this way, or protecting yourself. There's no harm in doing that. And it's not a sign of weakness. It's just that, hey, it's like a boundary. So one of the most important things I try to do with people is get them to understand contracts and not be fearful of them, which is why I talk about them all the time. And I don't just talk about them in sort of construction events and to people in construction. I talk to everyone I know about contracts. I laugh and joke about it because I'm always talking about it. But in all honesty, with one of my clients, I developed a contract with them, and the way I sort of set it out looked like a standard mobile phone contract, because most people will have a mobile phone contract and they've never read it. My husband takes the mick out of me because I read everything before I sign it. We were on holiday recently. They're like, just sign here. Yeah, you just need to sign there. And I was like, I'm reading it. And my husband's like, of course you are. And rolled his eyes at me. But ultimately, if you don't know what's expected of you, then how are you supposed to deliver? How are you supposed to achieve anything? How are you supposed to hit those expectations if you don't understand them? So the key thing I want people to understand is far more dangerous to just not sign a contract than it is to read it. And if you don't understand it, there's so much help out there. It's unbelievable. And even if you turn around to someone who's written the contract and say, I don't really understand this, it's not a sign of weakness. You're not supposed to. Unless you're someone like me that's getting paid to read your contract. If you're a bricklayer or a plumber or whatever, that's not your qualifications. That's not your expertise. And no one is expecting you to be an expert in contracts. So it's just about mindset, and whatever your fear about negotiating or looking or reading or understanding contracts is, firstly, you're not alone, because the entire industry does it. And secondly, once you've done it once or twice, the same as anything, you'll feel better about it. But it's so, so important, and it can be used to your advantage.
So if somebody's got a contract they have on their desk right now and they need to sign it, but they're really unsure, what's the first thing that they should look at before anything else?
First of all, the contracts they should be looking at are the ones that they haven't looked at and have already signed or are agreed by definition of working them. They're where they need to start. But yeah, if you're looking at a contract, there's some things you are much of a muchness, and some of it's going to be waffle and some of it's never going to happen. But the key things to me are the payment terms, because once you agree to those or you stepped on side, that's something you can't change. But actually what people don't understand is if the payment terms aren't favourable, you can renegotiate cost and say, well, fine, if you don't want to change my payment terms, then I'm going to add 5%, 10%, whatever it may be, because ultimately you are not their bank or their credit facility. So that's things are payment terms. So the key thing is payment terms, how you get paid for variation, day works, and design approval if that's relevant. And the other thing is you need to check and see whether or not you have to submit data sheets for products, whether they've been specified or not. The key things is always understanding the bits to get paid. I've said many times, this is about empowerment. This is not about making people feel stupid or making people panic. And I don't want anyone laying up at 3 o'clock in the morning because my voice going round and round in their head. I really don't. I know how that feels. if you have signed a contract, if you haven't signed a contract, you've got a contract, but you're feeling worried, just reach out. It doesn't have to be me. Find another QS or someone you know to put their eyes over it. Depending on the size of the contract, sometimes it doesn't take long. If you want me to look at a contract, then I do offer a service where you send me your contract and I review it. We can either sit on a Zoom call, you can show me the contract and you just pay for an hour of my time and we go through it and I can have a review. You can send it to me. I can have a look at it first and then I can either do a report or I can just tell you some hints and tips or whatever it may be. Like there's a number of things. It doesn't necessarily have to cost you thousands for me to just look at it. Obviously, it depends on the size of it. If you're looking at entering into a contract for 50 million, then yeah, that's not going to be a 5-minute exercise. I can even have a look at contracts you've already signed, make sure that you are aware of what you've signed up to, whether it's physically signed or not. And I can take it even further if necessary. If you've got a project that you are now panicking about, not all is lost, because until you've hit final account, and even if you're final account stage, there is a possibility that you can backtrack with the information and get something done. So at the end of the day, it's never too late. And as I've said before, and one of the reasons of doing the podcast is because I want to empower people and I want to get people to not be at the point that they're either going bust, they're panicking, they're sleepless nights, they're having issues. It's trying to get people to start looking at things in a different way, performing in a different way, being educated, knowing how to perform. It's not that they haven't done anything wrong, they're just uneducated in this instance. Like I don't necessarily see myself as the smartest person in the room, but a lot of the time I'm the most educated. So that makes a difference. And education is power. There's no two ways about it. So don't panic at whatever stage you are in a contract or your business, whether you're growing, you've grown, you want to grow, you've just started, it makes no difference. There's always a way, unless you're in liquidation, there's a problem. There are points of no return. But until that day, until that point, there's always a potential that we can turn things around. So things can happen. And I'm working with a lot of funders, and one of the biggest things with funding is the worst thing to do in construction, which is different to any other industry, is pull the money. It's the worst thing you can do. And I can deliver a plan and say, listen, give us some time, give us this, give us that. If not, it's going to cost you tenfold, because getting a new contractor in is really, really expensive and people don't always look at it like that. I've worked for dudes go, oh, it's fine if they go bust. It's fine. It will save us money. We don't have to pay them. No, you will have to pay triple to finish the project if you don't pay them. And it's about delivering the project. And ultimately, if there is a major problem, you haven't got to represent yourself. I will. Or there are other people just like me that do similar services. There is help around, and it's about finding the right consultant for you. And I'm not going to be suitable for everybody. Not everybody likes the way I work. And I get that and I'm cool with that. But I am the perfect person for some of the people.
And most importantly, don't bury your head in the sand.
And also, don't be a pushover. Like, don't let them bully you. And ultimately, if you don't feel like you've got the strength, the education, the confidence to battle someone, get someone around the table like me, because I will go full hog, wipe the floor with someone, especially if they're being out of order and they're being discriminatory or bullies and they're not going within the lines. I've got no problem in standing there and running rings around them. It's my favourite thing to do. I can't do it all the time, it takes a lot of energy, but I love it. And when people are real bullies and I'm working for somebody that's a real decent human being, oh, it's a sight. Not something you want to be experiencing on the wrong side of that table. Let me tell you that for nothing. But that's where I really come into my own. It's about empowerment. And if you haven't got the power right now, I've got enough for both of us. And eventually you'll be able to do it yourself.
A very informative, educational and interesting episode. I'm so glad I was a part of it. Next episode, we're going to be diving into applications for payment. Thank you, Michelle, for taking the time to break down the world of contracts and empowering people to read them, question them, but I think most of all, appreciate the value of them.
Definitely. It's a fun. Thank you.
If you found value in today's episode, hit subscribe so you never miss a new release, and share it with someone in the industry who needs to hear it. To learn more, access resources, or find out how Michelle Carr and Construction Alchemy can help you protect your projects, solve problems, and boost your profits, visit constructionalchemy.co.uk. Together, we can change the industry, one project, one company, and one episode at a time. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are based on the personal experiences of Michelle Carr and her guests. They offer general information only and should not be relied upon as professional or legal advice. Always seek your own independent advice before making decisions. Neither Michelle Carr nor Construction Alchemy accepts liability for any loss, damage, or consequences arising from actions taken based on this podcast. Thank you for listening.